counter-narrative news with daily news on Wednesday, the 26th of April 2023. Going straight again to Sudan, tragic scenes developing in Khartoum as two forces of basically supremacists, of internalized white supremacists, right-wing violent factions are vying for power. It's a faction fight between two sectarian forces who both have their roots with the former supremacist president of Bashir, who promoted all kinds of violent sectarian divisions, not only in Sudan, but right across North Africa and the Middle East and the wider Muslim world. It was actually interesting. We met an Sudanese comrade today from Khartoum, who's tragically one of his family has been killed in the fighting in Khartoum recently, and he's trying to get his family out into Egypt, and that pertains and relates to how many people are trying to escape this violence, which has nothing to do with the interests of the masses. You have the West manipulating it and pretending to be the friends of the Sudanese, who are the historic colonizers and the people who have destabilized the region, not least in the Sahel and in North Africa with their destruction of Libya by NATO in 2011. And on the other hand, you have the forces from Moscow depositing their racist death squad, Wagner, into the toxic mix in Sudan, while looting some 20-ton plus of Sudanese gold that belongs to the Sudanese workers and peasants and oppressed people. It's a horrific situation, and it shows that the oppressed people of the world have no friends in any state on the planet today anymore. They are by themselves, and in that frame, so much respect to the revolutionary popular forces in Sudan who overthrew the supremacist dictatorship of Omar Bashir. Related to that, it's interesting that it's been reported that Bashir has been moved from a prison into a hospital. So you can see, the RSF faction on the one hand fighting Burhan of this so-called Sudanese army on the other hand, they're both vying for control and power, and Bashir is clearly an important linchpin and figurehead in this whole sordid conflict there. All victory to the Sudanese people. We wish their ongoing revolution at the very best. Going over to laughable comments and scenes from the colonial puppet and joker, which is Guaido, who was tried to overthrow the Bolivarian government in Venezuela. He on foot left Venezuela to enter Colombian territory last Monday, then got expelled by the Colombian authorities on the Tuesday, and then arrives with his tail between his legs in the home of his political seniors and controllers in Miami in the USA. So it's very interesting to see how much of a failure Guaido's whole neo-colonial project has become, and good on the Colombian authorities for expelling this totally pathetic, disgusting excuse for a human being. But in that regards, perhaps the Colombian government, and we should reflect on why would they want to be disarming revolutionary armies anyway? But while we commend the Colombian government for taking a correct action around this person, it perhaps should be explored why a left-wing government would want to disarm the very successful and important revolutionary armies of the poorest peasantry and workers in Colombia, which there are several that the Gustavo Petro, the president of Colombia, wants to disarm them. If you're going to disarm them and then you're out of power and the right wing back, well, what position does that put these oppressed people? So not the most wisest of moves, arguably, there. President Xi of China, for the first time in over a year, has finally managed to force himself to reach out to the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, in a phone call. And Zelensky has been quite sophisticated in dealing with China because he's just seen it as just a constructive move and is treating it like that, and is encouraging the Chinese to engage with Kiev more in their plight as being a much smaller nation being invaded by a superpower neighbor next door, Russia, in their project of colonial occupation and all of that rape and pillage and destruction that goes along with a colonial occupation and their annexation project there. It will be interesting to see what more comes out of these conversations between the Ukrainian and the Chinese. Zelensky has been keen to develop the dynamic from the phone call in establishing a new ambassador to Beijing from his cabinet. One is not arguing, therefore, that Zelensky is any kind of hero or a great leader of the Ukrainian people, but the real emphasis and the main point is that the self-determination of small nations against a colonial invasion and project of annexation is a very important concept and principle central to radical anti-colonial socialist politics and understanding and ethics. Going over to Kazakhstan, a trashy Tory MP called Daniel Kaczynski has been exposed of taking some corrupt money of £5,000 to go observe an election in Kazakhstan recently. And he's been exposed into doing, and of course he's trying to defend himself. This individual is very interesting because we had relations with someone who's relatively senior in the Libyan socialist state that was destroyed in a project led by Britain in 2011 in the NATO operation there. And this particular person that we were working with, most of his family were killed in a NATO bombing in his very modest kind of farmhouse that I actually visited. The site of the bombing. His wife and several children were killed, and other house staff in this particular bombing. And this individual that we spoke to, who was a member of this, who was a survivor of this family, of the NATO bombing of his home and his family, he was actually friends with Daniel Kaczynski, and he requested that I message Daniel Kaczynski, which I did in an email, to say, you said you were my friend, this Libyan leading colleague of mine. He asked me to tell Daniel Kaczynski, like, how basically dare you pretend to be a friend of mine, and now look at what your government and state is doing to me and my family. And of course, Kaczynski is a shameless person and didn't respond to the correspondence which I facilitated for the Libyan colleague. This is just to kind of illustrate the degree of depravity and manipulation and deceit that individuals in these British colonial institutions are absolutely steeped in. That's counter-narrative news. We're wishing everyone a fantastic day. Please continue to support us by asking your friends and networks to following us on our YouTube channel here, and also perhaps on Twitter at _CNN. Many thanks.